Jakarta, May 1998. A city is burning. On the television screens, you see a man in a military uniform. He is smiling. He is calm. He has ruled this country for 32 years. He calls himself father of development. But in the streets, his children are hunting other children. Chinese shops are being looted. Women are being dragged from cars. Students are shot in universities. The smoke rises from Glodok, from Tanah Abang, from Solo. And the man on TV? He does not blink. 3 days later, he resigns. He boards a plane. And just like that, 32 years of stability evaporates like gasoline on fire. This is not a story about Indonesia. This is a story about you. Because that same year, while Jakarta burned, the New York Stock Exchange hit record highs. While bodies floated in the rivers of Solo, Goldman Sachs was celebrating in Manhattan. The World Bank called it necessary structural adjustment. The IMF said it was unfortunate but temporary turbulence. You see, there is a word they use when your country has chaos. They call it a humanitarian crisis. But when their investments are protected, they call it stability. Democracy is not a system. It is a product. And like all products, it comes with terms and conditions. Let me show you the fine print. There is a cage. You cannot see the bars. You cannot touch the walls. But you feel it every time you check your bank account. Every time you watch the news. Every time you cast a vote. We are told a story. A beautiful, comforting story. The story says that you are the master. That the government works for you. That your voice matters. But history is not a story. History is a crime scene. And if you look closely at the fingerprints, you will realize something terrifying. Democracy was not designed to give you power. It was designed to keep you quiet. It is not a system of liberation. It is a system of management. And you? You are not a citizen. You are the inventory. Let's go back to the beginning. Ancient Athens. The so-called cradle of democracy. We worship this era. We build statues to it. But if you look closer, you will see the cracks. Picture this. An old man with a grey beard stands in the Athenian court. He has no lawyer. He has no PowerPoint presentation. He only has questions. What is justice? He asks. What is virtue? Why do we believe what we believe? The jury of 500 shopkeepers and farmers shuffle uncomfortably. They don't like questions. Questions make them feel stupid. Questions make them feel small. This man, Socrates, has been asking questions for decades. Making the powerful look foolish. Making the young think differently. The prosecutors stand up. They say he corrupts the youth. They say he does not respect the gods. The real crime? He made people think. The vote is called. 280 to 220. Guilty. They hand Socrates a cup of hemlock poison. His hands are steady. He drinks. And within hours, the wisest man in Athens is dead. Killed by democracy. The truth is, the founding fathers of Greek philosophy hated democracy. Especially Plato, Socrates' student. In the Republic, Plato asks a simple question. If you were setting out on a journey by sea, who would you want deciding the course of the ship? Just anyone? Or a captain educated in the rules of seafaring? Democracy, Plato argued, is like letting the passengers steer the ship. Even if they don't know how to read the stars. Even if they are drunk. Even if they have never seen the ocean before. This wasn't just theory. It was a warning written in his teacher's blood. This is the first glitch in the matrix. Democracy is only as good as the education of the voters. If the voters are easily manipulated, democracy doesn't create freedom. It creates mob rule. And if you can control the mob, you don't need a throne. You just need a good story. Fast forward 2,300 years. New York City, 1929. A group of beautiful women in flapper dresses walk down Fifth Avenue. At a secret signal, they each pull out a Lucky Strike cigarette. They light them in unison. Photographers, planted in the crowd, capture the moment. The next day, newspapers across America run the headline. Women light torches of freedom. This was not spontaneous. This was theater. Directed by a man named Edward Bernays. Bernays was the nephew of Sigmund Freud. He understood something that would change the world forever. You don't need to force people to do what you want with guns or chains. You can force them with desires. You can force them with identity. He called it the engineering of consent. Before Bernays, it was taboo for women to smoke in public. The tobacco companies were losing half the market. So they hired him. And he didn't argue with logic or statistics. He used psychology. He understood that people don't buy products. They buy feelings. They buy belonging. They buy the story of who they want to be. So he transformed cigarettes from a health hazard into a symbol of liberation, of equality, of rebellion against the patriarchy. Sales to women increased by 300% in 1 year. Lung cancer rates followed decades later. But Bernays didn't stop there. He worked for presidents, for corporations, for governments. He convinced Americans to eat bacon for breakfast. He helped overthrow the government of Guatemala for the United Fruit Company. He made the word propaganda sound dirty, so he rebranded it as public relations. He wrote a book in 1928. The title was simple and terrifying. Propaganda. In it, he wrote, "The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government which is the true ruling power." He is saying that manipulation is not a bug in democracy. It is a feature. It is necessary. And those who do the manipulating? They are the real government. This is exactly how modern politics works. They don't sell you policies. They sell you identity. They sell you torches of freedom. They make you feel like voting for a specific party is an act of moral righteousness, an act of self-expression. But in reality, you are just buying the product they want to sell. You are not a voter. You are a consumer. And your ballot is just a receipt. The architects of modern democracy knew this. They were not idealists. They were terrified aristocrats. They saw the poor rising up after World War I. They saw the Russian Revolution. They saw chaos, and they needed a solution. They asked a simple question. How do we stop the poor from killing the rich without giving the poor actual money? The answer was brilliant. You give them a voice. You let them speak. You let them vote on small things. You let them feel powerful. Because a man who feels heard is less likely to burn down your house. Democracy was created as a pressure valve. It releases the steam so the engine doesn't explode. But for centuries, this system was fragile. The gap between the rich and poor was too visible. The aristocrats still wore powdered wigs. The workers still lived in slums. The contrast was dangerous. So the system invented a security feature. A buffer zone. We call it the middle class. The middle class was not a natural evolution of economics. It was engineered. After World War II, Western governments made a calculated decision. They would give a segment of the population just enough comfort to keep them loyal. A mortgage. A car. A television. A little bit of savings. A pension plan. A 2-week vacation. Not wealth, but comfort. Not freedom, but the illusion of mobility. And it worked brilliantly. If you have a mortgage, you don't riot. If you have a pension plan, you don't demand revolution. If you have something to lose, you become the guardian of the status quo. You are not protecting the rich because you love them. You are protecting the rich because you are terrified of falling back into poverty. You are terrified of becoming one of them. The homeless. The welfare recipients. The failures. Democracy became the art of keeping this middle group just comfortable enough to fear change, but just anxious enough to keep working. It is a golden handcuff. Beautiful. But still a chain. Every month, a number decides how you sleep. Your rent. Your debt. Your credit score. Your job security. And you never voted on any of it. But you did vote on whether a politician wore a tan suit. You did vote on whether someone kneeled during the national anthem. You did vote on which bathroom people should use. As long as you are fighting about the curtains, you won't notice that the house is burning down. Let me take you back to Indonesia. Because this country is the laboratory. This is where the experiment was perfected. In 1955, Indonesia held what many historians call its only real election. It was pure. It was honest. Political parties debated ideas. Communist Party. Islamic parties. Nationalist parties. Socialists. Over 90% of the people voted. But the result? Chaos. Gridlock. Too many voices. Too many visions. Nothing could get done. The West looked at this and panicked. A free Indonesia might choose the wrong path. It might nationalize its oil. It might close its markets. It might align with the Soviets. So in 1965, something happened. To this day, the details are murky. But what we know is this. Between 500,000 to 3 million people were killed. Accused communists. Accused sympathizers. Teachers. Union organizers. Chinese Indonesians. Intellectuals. Rivers ran red. Villages were burned. And who took power? General Suharto, a man the West could do business with. For the next 32 years, Indonesia held elections like clockwork. Every 5 years. They called it Pesta Demokrasi, the festival of democracy. Colorful banners, speeches, ballot boxes. But it wasn't a choice. It was a theater production. The winner was decided before the ballots were printed. Civil servants were forced to vote for Golkar, the ruling party. Villages were intimidated by the military. The opposition was allowed to exist, but only as decorations. Like plastic flowers in a vase. They gave the illusion of choice, but they had no roots. No water. No chance to grow. And the world? The so-called democratic West? They applauded this. The World Bank gave loans. The IMF gave praise. Western oil companies drilled freely. Mining companies extracted gold and copper from Papua. They called Indonesia stable. They called Suharto a moderate. Time magazine put him on the cover with the headline Man of the Year. Why? Because the oil was flowing. Because the factories were open. Because the sweatshop were producing cheap shoes for Nike and Gap. This proves a dark truth. The global system prefers a cooperative dictator over an unpredictable democracy. Then came 1997. The Asian financial crisis. The currency collapsed. The banks failed. The IMF came with a rescue package. But the rescue had conditions. Cut subsidies. Raise prices. Open markets even wider. The price of rice tripled. The price of cooking oil tripled. People were starving. And the rage that had been suppressed for 32 years finally exploded. May 1998. Students marched. They were shot. Riots erupted. Jakarta burned. And Suharto, the man who had ruled with an iron fist, resigned in 72 hours. Indonesia transitioned to democracy. Real democracy this time. Or so they said. But here's the twist. Here's the part they don't tell you in political science textbooks. The same families who controlled the economy under Suharto still control it today. The same oligarchs who profited from dictatorship now fund political parties. Elections are free, yes. But expensive. A presidential campaign costs hundreds of millions of dollars. Where does that money come from? Corporations. Tycoons. Oligarchs. And when they pay for your campaign, they own your policies. So Indonesia has democracy now. You can vote for anyone you want. As long as they are pre-approved by the people who own the country. The aesthetics changed. The system did not. This is what they call procedural democracy. You have the procedures. The elections. The parliament. The constitution. But you don't have the substance. You don't have power. The mask of democracy is the perfect camouflage for oligarchy. But to truly understand how democracy is weaponized, we must look at the graveyard of empires. We must look at Afghanistan. For 40 years, the two greatest powers on earth tried to force their systems onto this land. First, the Soviet Union. In 1979, Soviet tanks rolled into Kabul. They said they were there to liberate the Afghan people from feudalism. They brought communism. They brought secularism. They brought tanks. It was a disaster. The people did not want their liberation. They wanted their land. The Soviets killed over 1 million people. They destroyed villages. And after 10 years of blood and treasure, the Soviets retreated. The empire collapsed shortly after. Then came the Americans. September 11, 2001. The towers fell. The rage was real. But the response? It mutated. The Americans invaded Afghanistan in October 2001. The mission was clear. Find Osama bin Laden. Destroy Al-Qaeda. It should have taken months. But it lasted 20 years. Because the mission changed. Now it wasn't just about terrorism. It was about nation building. It was about bringing democracy to the Hindu Kush. They spent over $2 trillion. They built schools that no one attended because the Taliban threatened the teachers. They built highways that were blown up the next day. They trained an Afghan army that had more ghost soldiers on the payroll than real ones. They installed a democratic government in Kabul that was so corrupt, the money was literally flown out of the country in suitcases. The president's brother was a drug lord. Governors were warlords. Policemen were predators. And what was the result? The moment the last American plane left Kabul in August 2021, the government collapsed in hours. Not days. Hours. The president fled. The army vanished. The Taliban returned. They didn't even have to fight. They just walked into the palace and sat on the throne. 20 years. $2 trillion. Hundreds of thousands of dead. For nothing. This wasn't just a military failure. It was an ideological failure. It proved that you cannot bomb a country into becoming a democracy. Democracy requires a specific culture, a specific history. When you try to export it like a McDonald's franchise, it doesn't create freedom. It creates monsters. And nowhere was this monster more visible than in Iraq. If you want to see the moment when the world lost its innocence, look at February 5, 2003. Look at the United Nations Security Council. Look at Colin Powell, the U.S. Secretary of State. He holds up a small vial. He says it contains anthrax. He shows satellite images. He says they are mobile chemical weapons labs. He says that Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction. The media repeated it. The New York Times, The Washington Post, CNN, BBC. They beat the drums of war. They sold the war like a Hollywood movie. They called it Operation Iraqi Freedom. Shock and awe. Liberty. Democracy. But it was a lie. All of it. There were no weapons of mass destruction. The aluminum tubes were not for nuclear centrifuges. The mobile labs were weather balloons. The intelligence was fabricated. But the war happened anyway. March 2003. Baghdad burned. Hundreds of thousands of civilians died. And who won? Not the Iraqi people. Not American soldiers who came home with PTSD and missing limbs. The winners were Halliburton, Blackwater, KBR, the military contractors who made billions. The winners were the oil companies that seized the fields. They dismantled the Iraqi state. And in that vacuum, they created ISIS. The chaos of Iraq didn't just stay in the Middle East. It destabilized Syria. It created the refugee crisis that destabilized Europe. It proved that spreading democracy is just a code word for regime change. And then came the era of hope and change. 2008, Barack Obama. A new generation. A different approach. No more boots on the ground. No more invasions. Now, we would use smart power. Enter the Arab Spring. December 2010. Young people took to the streets. They used Facebook. They used Twitter. They wanted dignity. They wanted jobs. And the West cheered. They called it the Facebook Revolution. But let's look at the cynicism behind the curtain. Let's look at Libya. Muammar Gaddafi was a dictator. But he kept Libya stable. He had the highest standard of living in Africa. But he made a mistake. He wanted to create a gold-backed African currency called the gold dinar. He wanted African nations to stop trading oil in US dollars. That was unforgivable. So when protests started in Libya in 2011, the West didn't just support the protesters. They became the air force for the rebels. NATO bombed Libya for 7 months. They destroyed the Libyan army. When Gaddafi was captured by rebels, he was brutally murdered. Hillary Clinton, the US Secretary of State, laughed on camera. She famously said, "We came, we saw, he died." It was a moment of pure imperial arrogance. And what is Libya today? It is not a democracy. It is a failed state. It is an open-air slave market where African migrants are bought and sold like cattle. The weapons from Gaddafi's armories flowed south. They destabilized Mali, Niger, Chad. The Arab Spring turned into the Arab Winter. The hope of democracy was weaponized to destroy sovereign nations that refused to bow. The lesson is clear. When the West says they support your revolution, check your resources. Check your pipelines. They are not there to save you. They are there to scavenge the wreckage. But you don't have to look at war zones to see the failure of the Western model. Look at your neighbors. Look at the so-called Asian tigers. Let's talk about the miracle of Singapore. The West calls it a flawed democracy. Some call it Disneyland with the death penalty. But let's look at the data. Singapore has no natural resources. It is a tiny island. It should not exist as a wealthy nation. But under Lee Kuan Yew, it went from third world to first world in a single generation. Today, Singapore's GDP per capita is higher than the United States. Its streets are safer. How? Not by listening to every voice. Not by paralyzing the government with endless debates. Lee Kuan Yew was ruthless. He famously said, "Poetry is a luxury we cannot afford." He crushed political opponents. He sued newspapers into bankruptcy. He banned protests. In a Western liberal democracy, he would be called a tyrant. But he offered his people a different deal. A social contract that the West is too afraid to admit exists. The deal was this: give me your individual freedom to scream in the streets, and I will give you public housing. I will give you safety. You can walk alone at 3 a.m. I will give you education. I will give you a passport that is respected everywhere. I will give you wealth. And the people took the deal. Because the deal was real. He delivered. While New York and London are filled with homelessness, crime, and crumbling infrastructure, Singapore is pristine. It proves that you don't need liberal democracy to have human dignity. Sometimes you need a firm hand to build the house before you can argue about the furniture. Now look at Vietnam, a country that defeated the United States in a brutal war. A country run by a single communist party. By Western standards, it is unfree. There are no opposition parties. But economically, it is a dragon. Vietnam has become one of the fastest growing economies in the world. They copied the Chinese model. Keep the politics tight, but open the economy. Let people make money. Let them travel. Let them buy cars and houses. Just don't challenge the party. They call it bamboo diplomacy. Strong roots, but flexible branches. They do business with America, with China, with Russia. They don't let ideology get in the way of profit. And look at Malaysia. For decades, under the Barisan National Coalition, Malaysia was effectively a one-party state. Elections were held, yes. But the result was always known. And during those years of flawed democracy, Malaysia built the Petronas Twin Towers. They built a modern economy. They became a middle-income country. But recently, Malaysia tried to be more democratic. Governments rose and fell. Prime ministers changed every few months. And what happened to the economy? It stalled. Investment slowed. Confidence dropped. Stability, it turns out, has economic value. This is the Asian paradox. The West tells us that freedom brings prosperity. But in Asia, we see that stability brings prosperity. And often, stability requires limiting freedom. Now zoom out even further. Look at the giants. Look at China. In 1980, China was one of the poorest countries on earth. Then Deng Xiaoping took power. He made a deal with the Chinese people. An unspoken social contract. It goes like this. We, the Communist Party, will stay in power. You cannot vote us out. But in exchange, we will make you rich. And they delivered. In the last 40 years, China lifted 800 million people out of poverty. They built 40,000 kilometers of high-speed rail. More than the rest of the world combined. They didn't do it with ballot boxes. They did it with brutal, cold, efficient planning. The leaders in China are not chosen by a popularity contest. They are chosen by merit within the party. They are engineers. They are technocrats. They think in decades, not 4-year election cycles. In the West, a politician's main skill is talking. In China, a leader's main skill is execution. While Western democracies are paralyzed by culture wars, arguing about statues and pronouns, China is building. Russia is building. While American cities are filled with tent encampments and crumbling bridges, Moscow and Shanghai are spotless, futuristic, and safe. This forces us to ask the question that no one in the West wants to answer. What if democracy is actually inefficient? What if the will of the people is just a drag on progress? But here's where it gets truly sinister. Because the West realized they were losing the argument. Authoritarian systems were delivering results. So they evolved. They didn't abandon democracy. They automated it. Enter the age of algorithmic control. Cambridge Analytica, Facebook, Google, TikTok. In 2016, something strange happened. Brexit and Donald Trump. The experts were shocked. How did this happen? Cambridge Analytica, a data firm, harvested the personal information of 87 million Facebook users. They built psychological profiles. They knew your fears, your hopes, your insecurities. And they didn't send you facts. They sent you feelings. Micro-targeting, personalized propaganda, behavioral modification at scale. This is democracy in the 21st century. You think you are making a choice, but the choice has been engineered. Your feeds are curated. Your emotions are manipulated. Red versus blue. Left versus right. You are encouraged to hate your neighbor, to scream on social media. This noise is useful. As long as you are fighting each other horizontally, you are not looking up vertically at the architecture of power. They have monetised your anger. Every time you fight a stranger online, a corporation makes money from the ad revenue. You are not a revolutionary. You are a battery in their machine. But maybe I'm being too cynical. Maybe the system still works. Maybe your vote still matters. Let's look at the data. In 2014, Professors Martin Gilens of Princeton and Benjamin Page of Northwestern analyzed nearly 2,000 policy changes in the United States. They compared what the average public wanted versus what actually became law. The result was a flat line. Zero. There was statistically zero correlation between what the majority of people wanted and what the government did. But when they looked at what the economic elites wanted, the top 10%, the line went straight up. If the elites wanted a policy, it became law. If they opposed it, it died. Translate that into plain English. Your vote is a suggestion. Their money is a command. Look at the 2008 financial crisis. The banks gambled with your money. They crashed the global economy. Millions lost their homes. And what happened? The government printed trillions of dollars to bail them out. Socialism for the rich. Capitalism for the poor. This is the illusion. They let you vote. They let you protest. But the decisions have already been made in rooms you will never enter. So how do they maintain this illusion? How do they keep you believing? They use a concept called the Overton window. Imagine a window. Everything inside the window is considered reasonable to talk about. Everything outside the window is radical. The genius of the system is that they let you have fierce debates. Vicious arguments. But only about things inside the window. You can fight about abortion. You can fight about gun control. You can fight about bathrooms and pronouns. But you cannot talk about the window itself. You cannot talk about why the Federal Reserve is privately owned by banks. You cannot talk about why the US has 800 military bases in 80 countries. As long as you are fighting about the curtains, you won't notice that the house is burning down. And the fire started exactly on August 15, 1971. This is the most important date in modern history, yet they don't teach it in schools. Before this date, money was tied to gold. The government could not just print endless cash. If they wanted to spend, they had to tax you. And you would feel the pain immediately. But in 1971, President Nixon severed the link between the dollar and gold. He turned money into paper, into fiat. Why does this matter? Because it gave the government a superpower. The power to steal from you without you noticing. When they print $1 trillion to fund a war, or bail out a bank, or send checks during a pandemic, they are not creating value. They are diluting the money in your pocket. Imagine you have a pizza cut into 8 slices. If the government cuts it into 16 slices, do you have more pizza? No. You just have smaller slices. This is inflation. They tell you inflation is complicated. They tell you it's caused by supply chains or Putin or greed. They are lying. Inflation is a policy. Inflation is a hidden tax. Every year, your savings lose value. This forces you to gamble in the stock market just to survive. It forces you to work harder just to stay in the same place. You run on a hamster wheel that spins faster every year. This is why a man in the 1950s could support a family of 4, buy a house and a car on one salary. And today? A couple with 2 degrees and 2 jobs can barely afford rent. Did we become stupider? Did we become lazier? No. Our money became broken. They stole your time. They stole your labor. And they did it by changing the numbers in a computer at the Federal Reserve. And here is the ultimate test of whether democracy can handle existential threats. Climate change. The science has been clear since the 1980s. The planet is warming. And what has democracy done? Decades of conferences. Beautiful speeches. And what actually happened? Global emissions kept rising. Why? Because solving climate change requires sacrifice today for benefits tomorrow. And in a democracy, politicians need to get re-elected in 4 years. So they promise action, but they don't deliver pain. China, the authoritarian state, is leading the world in renewable energy. Not because they are morally superior, but because the government can mandate change without asking permission. Democracy is very good at protecting individual rights today, but it is terrible at protecting collective survival tomorrow. Because tomorrow doesn't vote. Let me show you how deep the illusion goes. Let's talk about your choices. You wake up. You check your phone. iPhone or Samsung. You drink coffee. Starbucks or Dunkin'. You watch TV. Netflix or Disney Plus. So many choices. So much freedom. But zoom out. Who owns these brands? 10 corporations control almost everything you buy. Nestle, Unilever, Coca-Cola, PepsiCo. You think you are choosing between competitors, but they are owned by the same investment firms. BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street. They own Coca-Cola and Pepsi. They own McDonald's and Burger King. When these companies compete, the profits flow to the same place. This is not a free market. This is an oligopoly with a democratic mask. And it's the same in politics. In America, you have 2 choices: Democrat or Republican. The candidates are different. But the policies? They serve the same masters. The donors, the corporations, the banks. You are given the freedom to choose between Coke and Pepsi. But you cannot choose water from a clean river, because the river has been privatized or polluted. You can vote, but you cannot vote on the things that actually shape your life. Your wages, your rent, your healthcare costs, your student debt. These are decided by markets, by corporations, by forces you cannot touch. This is the final illusion. You are free to choose within the menu, but you cannot question who wrote the menu. You cannot ask why these are the only options. You cannot leave the restaurant. Let me bring this back to Indonesia. Because after 1998, after Reformasi, we were told everything would change. And yes, things changed. You can criticize the government now. The press is free. But let's look at who actually holds power. In 2014, Joko Widodo, Jokowi, became president. He was sold as an outsider, a common man rising to power. But look closer. Look at who funded his campaign. Oligarchs. Tycoons. The same families who thrived under Suharto. They didn't back Jokowi because they believed in his vision. They backed him because they could control him. And what has happened? Infrastructure projects, yes. But who gets the contracts? The oligarchs. Who owns the land? The oligarchs. Who controls the nickel, the coal, the palm oil? The oligarchs. The system changed from military authoritarianism to electoral oligarchy. And when someone threatens this system, when a candidate actually represents the people, they are destroyed. Not with tanks. With media. With lawfare. Labor unions are crushed with the omnibus law. Environmental activists are jailed. And it all happens with a democratic stamp of approval. The genius of the modern system is that it doesn't need to ban elections. It just needs to make sure that no matter who wins, the oligarchs don't lose. And then came 2020. The pandemic. And the mask slipped. When COVID-19 hit, we saw two competing models. The authoritarian response versus the democratic response. China locked down Wuhan. It was dystopian. But it worked. They controlled the virus in months. Vietnam, another authoritarian state, had some of the lowest death rates in the world. Then look at the democracies. The United States, Britain, Brazil. Chaos, confusion, protests against masks. Freedom became a death sentence. The United States had over 1 million dead. Not because they lacked resources, but because they couldn't coordinate. In a democracy, you cannot force people to stay home. Because freedom. But here's the dark question. What if freedom kills? What if democracy is too slow to handle a fast-moving crisis? And millions of people in the West looked at the death toll and wondered, are they right? Let me show you the future. It is not in Washington or London. It is in Shenzhen. It is in Singapore. It is in Dubai. In China, there are 600 million surveillance cameras. Facial recognition everywhere. Your social credit score determines whether you can buy a plane ticket or get a loan. If you jaywalk, cameras catch you. The West calls this Orwellian. And it is. But it is also efficient. Crime is low. Scams are rare. The Chinese government knows this is a trade. Privacy for security. Freedom for order. And most people, when given that choice, choose order. But the cage is about to get smaller. We are moving from the era of broken money to the era of programmable money. Enter the CBDC. Central bank digital currency. Governments around the world are building this right now. They tell you it is for convenience. They tell you it is for safety. But look at the design. Cash is anonymous. It is freedom. A CBDC is a spy in your wallet. It allows the government to see every single transaction you make. But it gets worse. Because it is programmable, they can control how you spend it. Imagine a world where your money has an expiration date. Spend this stimulus check by Friday, or it disappears. Imagine a world where your money is restricted based on your carbon footprint. You bought too much gasoline this month. Your card is declined. This is not science fiction. This happened in Canada in 2022. When truckers protested against vaccine mandates, the government didn't send the army. They simply ordered the banks to freeze the accounts of the protesters. Overnight, people couldn't buy food. They couldn't pay rent. They were erased from the economy. And the protests stopped. This proved that if they control your money, they own you. This is the ultimate panopticon. They are building a system where dissent is not just illegal, it is impossible. Where your compliance is not enforced by a policeman with a baton, but by an algorithm that quietly shuts off your access to the world. And the scariest part? They will sell it to you as a feature. They will say, "Look, you can pay with your face. It's so easy." And like good consumers, we will line up to download the app. We will trade our liberty for convenience. We will walk into the digital cage, and we will close the door behind us. So let me tell you how the modern system actually works. Not the fairy tale. The architecture. At the top, you have the central banks. They control the money supply. They decide interest rates. And you never voted for any of them. Below that, you have the multinational corporations. They write the laws through lobbying. They fund the think tanks. They fund the media that tells you what to think. Below that, you have the politicians. They are not leaders. They are middle managers. Their job is not to change the system. Their job is to manage your expectations, to absorb your anger, to perform democracy. Every 4 years, you get to choose which middle manager gets the corner office. But the board of directors never changes. The shareholders never change. And at the very bottom, you have the people. That's you. You are the workforce. The consumers. The taxpayers. You are given just enough freedom to feel dignified. Just enough comfort to fear losing it. Just enough choice to believe you are free. The system is never wrong. You are just not trying hard enough. This is the ultimate trick. They made you blame yourself for a rigged game. So what do we do? I cannot tell you. Because the moment I give you an answer, I become another prophet selling salvation. What I can tell you is this. The cage is invisible because we built it ourselves. Every time you choose comfort over truth, every time you choose entertainment over action, every time you accept the menu without asking who wrote it, there is an old Javanese proverb, Gema Ripa Lo Jinawi, a land of abundance and prosperity. It sounds beautiful, but the second half of the proverb is often forgotten. Toto tentrum curto rahajo. Order through struggle and discipline. The West sold you the first half. The promise of abundance without sacrifice. Asia is building with the second half. Order, discipline, collective sacrifice. And they are winning. But here's what they won't tell you. Both systems are cages. One cage is decorated with the aesthetics of freedom. The other is decorated with the aesthetics of efficiency. But they are both cages. The Western cage says, "You are free to choose your chains." The Eastern cage says, "We will choose your chains, but they will be golden." And maybe, just maybe, the real question is not which cage is better. The real question is, why do we accept that we must live in a cage at all? Real power is not given. It is built. It is organized. It is economic. It is local. You cannot vote away poverty, but you can organize a union. You cannot vote away corporate control, but you can build cooperatives. You cannot vote away surveillance, but you can build alternative technologies. The system wants you to believe that politics happens every 4 years in a ballot box. But politics happens every day in how you spend your money, how you organize your community, how you relate to your neighbors. They want you isolated, atomized, scrolling alone in your room, angry at strangers on the internet. Because isolated individuals are powerless. But organized communities are dangerous. This is why they destroy unions. This is why they privatize public spaces. This is why they want you in debt. The system is working perfectly. It is doing exactly what it was designed to do. It transforms your anger into content, your activism into advertising, your revolution into a Netflix series. Until we understand that democracy in its current form is a management tool for the ruling class, we will remain exactly where they want us. Comfortably numb, ideally managed, and perfectly powerless. But here's the thing they don't want you to realize. The system is not strong because it is right. It is strong because we obey. The moment we stop obeying, the moment we stop playing the game, the moment we build something new outside their control, the entire architecture becomes visible. And once you see the cage, you can never unsee it. The question is not who you will vote for next. The question is not whether democracy is better than authoritarianism. The question is not East versus West. The question is, what are you going to build when you realize no one is coming to save you? What are you going to do when you realize that freedom is not given by a constitution, but taken through collective action? What are you going to do when you realize that the future is not voted into existence, but built by those brave enough to imagine it differently? The cage is invisible, but it is not invincible. The choice is not on the ballot. The choice is in the mirror. What will you do with that?